Well, the people have spoken and the brands have listened, and they are officially sorry about all the climate change they caused. But no brand is sorrier than shipping tycoon FedEx, who recently made a whole apology commercial set to the tune of Willie Nelson's mega hit apology song, Always on My Mind. Now, a little bit about that song. Willie didn't write Always on My Mind, but when he released his version in 1982, people lost their minds over it. The song was on the top 100 chart for 23 straight weeks. It won Willie Nelson 3 Grammys, and the Country Music Association named it Song of the Year in 1982, and then again in 1983. It won Song of the Year in a year it wasn't even released. People were acting like this is the first time they'd ever heard music. So when FedEx was shopping around for the perfect song to apologize to, they felt like Willie Nelson's Always on My Mind was a safe bet. The thing is, if you listen to the lyrics for even a single second, you'll notice that it's actually a terrible apology. Listen to this. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I should have. Maybe I didn't treat you well. If I made you feel bad, I'm sorry you feel that way. And the big apologetic hook is you were always on my mind. So I was thinking about you the whole time I wasn't treating you well? That's not better. That's worse. Not only did you mistreat the person, but you knew it was wrong the whole time. How did this song get... Okay, it's a great song, but it is a garbage apology, which, as it turns out, is accidentally the perfect song for FedEx to use in their commercial about how they're gonna make up for all the climate change they caused. See, their plan is to invest in electric vehicles,
reusable packaging, and carbon capture research, making Earth our priority.
They even got Willie Nelson in there for a line.
Thought I'd seen it all.
Obviously that was supposed to be I'd seen it all, not I'd see it all.
Thought I'd seen it all.
But Willie Nelson probably just did one take and then bailed, which of course he did. He's Willie Nelson.
By the way, Willie Nelson is the only person who's ever outsmoked Snoop Dogg.
He's got better things to do than stick around and third wheel as FedEx kind of apologizes for climate change. Plus, I mean, he must be so sick of that song by now. Talk about Always on My Mind. Dude's been singing that song on repeat for 39 years. No thank you. So FedEx launched their Priority Earth campaign and pledged to go net zero by 2040. Now, net zero just kind of means they're gonna reduce their emissions as much as they can, and then whatever's left over, they're gonna suck out of the air or somehow offset. See the video I did on offsets for how I personally feel about that. Spoiler alert, I don't feel great about them, but disregarding all of that, this is the same pledge that 50 other companies have already signed on to before FedEx did, so they are severely behind on this. But better late than never, I guess, and it's great to see FedEx owning up to the environmental damage they caused, which, by the way, is quite substantial. Their entire business model is based around more than 200,000 fossil fuel-powered vehicles blasting carbon dioxide straight into the atmosphere, and 680 planes emitting greenhouse gases as frequently as they possibly can. But they're sorry now, and they're gonna fix it with their new Priority Earth plan, so let's just scoot on over to their website. We got some kind of important delivery being made to an outdoor flower market. Sort of seems like the FedEx package is unrelated. We got this guy in the background absolutely going to town smelling these flowers. My God, look at that. Eyes closed, getting all those smells. Great resolution on that pic, by the way. Then we got this 3-part initiative. We got what they're actually doing. And of course, a statement from the big boss. And what's this? Oh, right away. We got some good news. They're not even starting from scratch here, folks. They've always had a commitment to sustainability. Let's check out their press release that goes into more detail. Since 2009, the company's efforts have contributed to approximately 40% reduction in CO2 emissions intensity across the enterprise, while package volume increased by 99% in that period. That is a weird way of saying we're already reducing our emissions and we're just such good and humble guys, we didn't even think to mention it until you brought it up. You know what, let me just go ahead and look at net emissions between those time periods because we're so into net stuff. And what? I actually cannot find it anywhere on the website. That is bizarre. Oh, you know what? It's 420. Maybe I'm just too high. Seriously though, it's just not here, but that's okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and page through this 67-page corporate report I found with 0.9 font and no pictures. That's incredibly hard to parse. And okay, 2008 was 14.1 million tons of CO2, and 2020 was 15.4 million tons. Oh, it went up. It went up. Okay, it just sort of feels like if you want your apology to be genuine, you should try to just be less purposely misleading with the numbers. It's kind of like saying, I used to cheat on you with 100% of the women at my gym, but since the curves across the street closed down and all those new women signed up, I only cheat on you with 60% of the women at my gym. And yes, technically I am cheating on you with more women than ever, but it could be worse, so you're welcome. And in keeping with an apology that sounds good, but is trash, FedEx bragging about a 40% reduction in emissions intensity conveniently forgets to mention that general improvements in vehicle and airplane technology, federal emissions standards, and a reduction in coal use in the American electrical grid represents about a 40% reduction in emissions intensity anyway. So when they say the company's efforts contributed to an overall reduction, the word contributed is just doing so much work in that sentence. It's like kissing its kids as they're sleeping and out the door by 7 and clocking out at like 9 p.m. This is a hard working word here. You know what? It doesn't matter. Let's just take a look at that plan, huh? Okay, the big money. They're gonna spend $2 billion of initial spending on Priority Earth. And just to put that in perspective, this is a company that made $69.2 billion last year. And I'm not saying $2 billion is nothing to FedEx, but I did notice that they spend about $4 billion every year buying fossil fuels for their vehicles. So it just kind of seems like $2 billion, or 2.9% of their annual revenue, is a little thin. But let's just see where that money is going, huh? Okay, first things first, electric vehicles. Which is great. I mean, FedEx has over 200,000 fossil fuel powered vehicles, so electrifying the fleet would actually substantially reduce their emissions, which is great. But if you read the fine print, it is not as great. The plan is to slowly start replacing the oldest trucks, the ones they were going to replace anyway, with a mixture of gas-powered and electric vehicles. 5 years into the Priority Earth plan, half of the trucks they buy are still going to be gas-powered, which is kind of a bummer, but I guess after a lifetime of not caring about the environment, if you go too fast the other direction, you're gonna give yourself like sustainability whiplash or something. I mean, plus it's not like we can expect FedEx to make something happen overnight. Don't look at that. Another chunk of that $2 billion is earmarked for aircraft modernization, which again is kind of just replacing your oldest planes with ones that are less likely to fall out of the sky, which is kind of something that they'd probably just be doing anyway. And they couldn't even resist throwing in a little brag about having saved 1.43 billion gallons of jet fuel since 2012, while leaving out the staggering 11 billion gallons of jet fuel that they are using. And I don't know about you, but when I'm reading this kind of thing in a supposedly apologetic press release, I can't help but reflect on times when I've been apologizing to people. And I just never realized that you can just go on the offensive and say things like, but think about how much worse I could have been. Also, I just noticed that Willie Nelson looks a lot like George Carlin, right? I Googled it and apparently this is not a thing people are talking about, but they look so similar. Look at them. You're looking at it. What's up with that? Anyway, we got a couple more promises, like make efforts to be more sustainable and invest in alternative fuels, but the big closer is FedEx giving $100 million to Yale to start the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture to research possible ways that they might be able to pull CO2 out of the air. And don't get me wrong, carbon capture is an objectively good thing to research, except Microsoft already announced a $1 billion carbon capture fund last year. So FedEx throwing $100 million at Yale is sort of like exactly in keeping with the kind of terrible apology always on my mind is. 2 years in a row it won Best Song. Are you kidding? Imagine being Willie Nelson and getting the phone call that it won it again and being like, didn't I already win? Also, I looked up Yale's endowment and it is $31.2 billion. So FedEx is basically tacking on an extra decimal point and calling it a day. And that's pretty much it. That's the pledge. FedEx is upgrading some of its trucks and planes and some of its infrastructure, and then handing $100 million to an Ivy League institution. Well, that's certainly not going to get you to net zero, so FedEx is going to have to spend a bunch more money. Oh, wait, I forgot to read the fine print part of the fine print, so let's just go ahead and check that out. Certain statements in this press release considered forward-looking statements. Such forward-looking statements are subject to risk, uncertainties, which could cause actual results to differ materially from such forward-looking statements. Okay, so in other words, we're gonna try to do net zero, but if it costs more than $2 billion, we're we're not gonna do it. And that's where I thought this video was gonna end. Or in the words of Willie Nelson,
I thought I'd seen it all.
seen it all, but we only had the one take, obviously. I thought I'd seen it all until I looked into FedEx's 2018 tax returns, and boy did it tell a story. After spending $10 million lobbying the government, FedEx successfully got a big tax break as part of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And in 2018, they saved themselves $1.6 billion on their tax bill. They got the same tax cut again in 2019, and in 2020, they got to combine their tax cut with the CARES Act to receive a rebate of $230 million. So if you're keeping score at home, that means that in the past 3 years, FedEx successfully lobbied their way out of paying $6 billion in tax money, which means their apology for knowingly making climate change worse was basically to take a third of the money they should have been paying us in taxes and spend it on themselves. And if that's not the worst apology I've ever heard, I don't know what is. Hit the conclusion music. That's the one. Ooh. Okay, here's the thing. FedEx is not alone. They're not even the worst ones. Companies like Microsoft, Amazon, FedEx will never be leaders in social movements, no matter how many commercials or net zero pledges they make. We lead, they follow. Always. You think Red Lobster celebrates Pride Month because they've always cared about the cause? No! They think this graphic is gonna sell them more Cheddar Bay biscuits. FedEx is no different, except for they're like 2 years late to the party. They're only making this late, half-assed pledge because the people they want money from are getting nervous about climate change, and FedEx is worried that their revenue might dip if people are mad at them. I mean, that's not even a guess. Mitch Jackson, FedEx's chief sustainability officer, says he talks to customers about sustainability every day, and customers aren't asking anymore, they're telling. So FedEx monitored the situation and decided that $2 billion and a flashy commercial was the minimum possible amount they need to spend to retain their revenue. That song isn't about the planet or sustainability, it's about the customer base. We were always on their minds. We were the ones that didn't want them to pollute or emit greenhouse gases or carve through natural resources, and they did it anyway. They were thinking about us the whole time, but mostly because they wanted to know how much neglect we would put up with.
I thought I'd seen it.
Not now, Willie. Look, all these pledges and net zero statements coming out of all these billion-dollar companies are really nothing more than a benchmark for how far the climate movement has gotten. And the level of bullshit is a pretty clear indication that it is nowhere near where it needs to be. I would love to be proven wrong here by some kind of upstart billion-dollar company that's really trying to do one for the planet, but I have just not seen it yet. And not to get dramatic, but corporations are leading on climate change in the same way that dictators are leading on deposing themselves. So speak up, tweet and call and read and have conversations. Organize for politicians who actually care about this stuff and join your local community groups. Because the one thing this commercial got exactly right about brands is that we are always on their minds. Because they want us to buy stuff from them. So we got that going for us, which is pretty nice. Okay, thank you so much for watching Climate Town. I really appreciate it. If you want to help me make these videos, I have a Patreon page where you get to see exclusive content, behind the scenes footage and stuff. But if you don't want to, don't do it. Okay, see you next time.
I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it at any time.